On May 21st, 4 p.m., 1527, in Valladolid, España, a child was born, Philip of the House of Habsburg, second of his name, by the grace of God, Prince of Spain. Under the parentage of Isabella of Portugal and Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, little Phil would grow up as a mama's boy, close to his mother and sisters until the age of 7. Out of the realization that girls were gay, Charles moved him to an all-male entourage in which many very prominent figures and tutors would reside and would stick with him for the better part of his life. One such figure was a man called Don Juan de Zúñiga y Vallaneda, whom would be in charge of little Phil while Charles V was putting out fires throughout his empire. Little Phil would grow to be a very devout Catholic. As little Phil grew up, he was constantly micromanaged throughout his childhood by his father via letters and through Don Juan de Zúñiga.
You know, mijo, I haven't really been there for you, but that is going to change right now. Adios! Growing up, Philip was very into books, languages, and God, giving half of his allowance to God in good faith. He became the first Spanish monarch to read Greek. He also learned other languages, such as Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew, in order to study the Bible in its original languages. War starts between Spain and France, and Philip is given governorship at age 16 while his father gives him some pro-gamer tips that he should probably not be a pushover. Then, his father, the Emperor Charles V, bugs Philip for money and men like a beggar. Hola, mijo. This is a little embarrassing, but it would be amazing if you could send me a couple of ducats, some hombres to fight off the ranas.
See, let me get back to you on that.
Órale, chamaco, it's me again, tu papa. I would really appreciate if you could send me those ducats y hombres right about now. Ay, Dios mío. Yo quiero eso dinero ahora.
Ya cállate la hocico, senile old man. We have no money for you, you leech!
Yeah, so about those ducats, sorry I called you. Turns out I didn't need it. Joined Turo Perez and I got the participation trophy.
Apparently, France was extremely easy to crush. This was most likely due to it being governed by frogs. On the 1st of November 1548, Philip went on tour through his future vassals and estates, going through Italy and ending up in the Netherlands with his father. They proceeded to have intense rave parties in the 16th century Dutch fashion, with his future enemies such as William of Orange.
Je veux que mon fils soit empereur.
Mais tu m'as pas mis!
Nous devons le tabler. Qu'est-ce que veut on empereur? Charles and his bro Ferdinand got in a big argument about succession to who would be the future emperor of the HRE. But Philip never bothered to learn the language of the frogs, so he's completely oblivious to the situation. He eventually headed back to Italy, where he decided to take a small 8 to 10 day vacation, in which, on the 27th of September, 1551, he received the news that the Turks had captured Christian outposts in Africa, and the frogs had just declared war. Never again would he find time to relax for 8 to 10 days.
Philip returns to Spain with far more experience and authority than ever before. But Charles V, on the other hand, wasn't doing so hot. He ended up having a mental breakdown in which he refused to see anybody or sign anything for 3 whole months. He then summoned Philip with the request for financial aid, in which Philip arrived with 4.5 million ducats.
Te necesito aquí, como ayer, con mucho dinero.
Alright, I'm here con tu dinero.
You are amazing. Did I ever tell you that you're mi favorito niño?
I'm your only son.
See, well, since you're here, I'ma head home and get some sugar
No.
and...
This is your war to deal with.
Ah, está bien. Lo que sea. Charles decided to marry off Philip to the roast beef widow, Mary Tudor, in which Philip was sent to England to lay down some of that Spanish charm.
Me gusta burning Protestants, y tú también te gusta burning Protestants. Tenemos so much in common. Alright, man.
They proceed to burn Protestants. The Pope decides to join in on the war, and of course, he joined in on the side of the Protestant-loving frogs, because reasons. He then proceeded to excommunicate Philip and Charles.
You are now excommunicated because God told me to unburden you with your rich lands.
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me!
The Neapolitan pizzaman easily curb stomps the Pope. Philip goes back to the Netherlands to take command due to his old man being too old. He tells Emmanuel Philibert to wait for him until the English reinforcements arrive.
Wait for me, the carne asadas are coming!
Aye, meatball ravioli.
A few inches later.
Give me just a few more days, please! Please wait for me.
Whatever.
Later.
Por favor, senor, please, they're just not here yet. Just a few more days, senor.
Forget about it.
France dies off camera. Of course, easy dub as always. 14 years later, one of Philip's counselors still remembered with satisfaction the day when we knocked the French for 6. In all within a week, Philip's father died, his aunt/wife died, he got very sad, he suddenly became the ruler of Spain without the S. This included all the headaches and problems of his father, on top of his own problems with the English. Elizabeth succeeded Mary as Queen of England, and Spain was still fighting the Turks. Philip tried to white peace, but they refused. He then got married again to some Princess Frog named Elizabeth of Laus, the daughter of Catherine de Medici. She was 14 and enjoyed spending tons of money and having a bunch of portraits of herself and knew absolutely no Spanish.
I've noticed that your husband doesn't like you very much. You should change that.
Oui, mama. She ended up learning Spanish, and Philip grew closer to her over time. And plus, she had her period. Philip made Madrid the capital because it was geographically right in the middle of Spain, and he could get information quicker. Philip would later unexpectedly inquisition the seaweed Protestants. Then the Dutch revolt happened, not because of all the public burnings and public torture, mind you, but instead because of an additional tax to pay for said public burnings.
People of Seaweed Land, we have decided to unexpectedly inquisition you and burn you heretics in public.
Okay, but we would rather you didn't.
Oh, and we are going to increase taxes.
Peace was never an option.
Philip then sends the Duke of Alba to go deal with it. Philip planned on going, but stuff came up. My liege, we desperately need you. If you are here right now, this would be much easier.
Yeah, I mean I would, but I don't really know, man. I sneezed a few times today. I sneezed twice this morning. I think I've gotten a cold. And then there's these Turkish dogs. So I'm pretty stressed even with all this money I have.
Philip would never again return to the Netherlands. His wife also died, which was very sad because he was very close to her. He then married his niece, Anne of Austria. Philip's one and only heir died. The potential that was wasted was like no other. Don Carlos was a perfect man with the ideal male body. With a perfect chin, uneven shoulders, a malformed short left leg, his muscles were weak, and he might have had malaria. Truly, a weapon to surpass Metal Gear. Having only 4 great-grandparents instead of the normal 8, his family tree was more like a family wreath. His labor took 3 days, and through the 3 days he was almost killed by asphyxiation on his umbilical cord before he ever left the womb.
His mother died giving birth, and his wet nurse died a few years later. His father was never there for him, and he was constantly spoiled. When he was older, he was sent to university to study, in which he fell and hit his head, got an infection, and became delirious, and only weighed about 76 pounds. In 1567, during a walk, water thrown from a window accidentally splashed him. His response, naturally, was to order the house to be set on fire. He tried to stab and kill the Duke of Alba in public and in broad daylight. He tried to throw a servant who bothered him through the window of the highest floor of the palace, and he also tried to kill a guard who had also displeased him in that same year. And finally, he decided to ask his uncle John of Austria to take him to Italy in secret in order to meet his cousin in person, just like in the fairy tales. His uncle refused, and Carlos got mad and tried to stab him.
You have all made a deadly mistake.
Philip then realized that he might be a little crazy and locked him up, in which Don Carlos fasted for 15 days trying to kill himself. And then he realized he didn't truly want to die, but the damage was already done. He tried to eat, but to no avail. He died of starvation. Within the next 2 years, the Duke of Alba pacified the Dutch and wanted to go home. However, Philip tried to guilt trip him to stay.
I did meet Rabao, and I've kind of been here for muchos años. Can I go home now?
Well, if you leave and the Dutch revolts again, God's not gonna be happy, and it would kinda be your fault.
Back in Spain, the Moors revolted in Andalusia, after which Philip sent his bro Don John to put them down, and Philip did a 16th century Trail of Tears before it was cool, sending them to North Africa, France, and the New World. In a different matter, Spain, Venice, and the Pope decided to join a holy league against the Ottomans. Philip would conceive, quite possibly one of the biggest brain plans ever.
Wait, tengo una idea.
Ay, mamma mia, spit it out!
We outnumber them, see? See. How about we just blob all our sheeps together and kill those Turkish dogs?
So Don John led the giant blob of 208 galleys and 30 warships that was the Holy League Armada, and found by pure chance the entire Ottoman fleet in the Gulf of Lepanto. On the 5th of October, 1571, 170,000 men fought in the Battle of Lepanto. The Holy League suffered 7,500 dead and 20,000 wounded, while they captured 130 Ottoman warships, 400 pieces of artillery, 3,500 prisoners. In addition, they sank 110 Ottoman galleys and liberated some 15,000 galley slaves. It was, as the naval commander Gian Andrea Dorea said, the greatest victory since Moses parted the Red Sea, after which the Venetians peaced out.
Tension was brewing between Spain and England, especially after the English captured some ships carrying money going to the Netherlands. Philip told Alba to invade, but Alba declined.
It's time we teach them carne asadas a lesson. Go now, and matarlos a todos.
¿Con qué dinero?
Dios proveerá.
With all the wars going on and all the extra taxing, a plague epidemic, and many storms, a recession hit the Dutch really hard, which made them revolt even harder. Philip tried micromanaging Alba all the way from Spain. However, Alba ignored and proceeded to do his job. He retreated to Brussels, waiting for the French invasion that never came.
Meanwhile, back in the Lola.
Alba with his 12,000 troops proceeded to go from town to town, capturing and razing along the way.
Your city or your life.
Okay.
Swear loyalty to España.
Nay.
Do not resist. Surrender and die.
Don't you mean surrender or die?
With this army? No, senor.
Now, can't we just talk about this, fellers?
Nope.
Philip, being in a two-front war, wanted to make peace with both the Ottomans and the Dutch. He told Alba to make peace at any price, but with no exception to religion. But the Dutch refused every offer because at this point the war was about religion. And while discussing peace with the Ottomans, Don John accidentally conquered Tunis.
Bath? Turk, turk, turk. Bath. Turk, turk, turk.
Hey bro, I just ruffled something stupid. Filthy pig swine Turks.
No. No es que lo miras.
Back in the Netherlands, Philip lost faith in Alba's abilities, so he replaced him with Don Luis de Recrudens. Recrudens suggested that they burn out the revolt. But there was another huge, big brain idea. The greatest idea. Simply said, let's flood them out. But Philip disagreed because burning did less damage. At this point there were 60,000 troops in the Netherlands, which was very expensive, and between 1571 and 1577 the war with the Ottomans had cost 7 million ducats, and at the same time the war with the Dutch had cost over 11 million ducats. Philip ran out of money and had to file for bankruptcy. He also refused to pay back his loans, and nobody would loan him any more money. So now he couldn't pay his troops, and because of this, they started to sack friendly Dutch towns for money, so then all of the Dutch were now revolting.
The Pope tells Don John that he should be King of England. So Don John asks Philip for assistance, but he replies that he'll help him as soon as the Dutch revolt is dealt with. So then, Don John is sent to the Netherlands to take command because Requesens wasn't very good at his job. Meanwhile, back in Spain, Philip's secretary Antonio Perez convinced him that Don John's secretary Juan de Escobedo was trying to talk Don John into betraying Philip. He then gives Perez permission to murder him, in which he was caught. Philip then realized that Perez was manipulating him the entire time. He then proceeded to put Perez under house arrest in order to cover up so that Perez wouldn't snitch on him that he gave permission to kill a possibly innocent person.
Meanwhile in Portugal, King Sebastian died along with his heir while on campaign in Morocco. as well as literally most of the nobility being killed or captured for ransom. His successor was his great-uncle Cardinal Henry, aged 67, which was very old for the time. After him, the closest legitimate heir to the throne was Philip. There was Don Antonio, who was the illegitimate heir of King Manuel, but at the same time was a prisoner in Morocco. He managed to go back to Portugal, but his uncle King Henry banished him. Knowing that King Henry was going to kick the bucket any second now, Philip began to plan an invasion of Portugal, but needed a certain somebody to get out of retirement for one last job.
Alright. I'll do it.
Philip was also quite the schemer. He had several assassination attempts on Queen Elizabeth, which all failed, but on July 10th, 1584, the Prince of Orange was assassinated, along with several other Dutch rebel leaders. As soon as Elizabeth found out that Philip was behind the attempts, on October 1585, she ordered Sir Francis Drake to privateer and pillage the Iberian coast with 30 ships and 1,600 soldiers. They then proceeded to capture Spanish treasure fleets coming from the New World. This was an official declaration of war. So Philip and his council devised a plan of retaliation to be rid of Elizabeth and the unwashed Anglican dogs, which they referred to as the Master Plan.
This is big brain time.
The plan was to build the largest armada in history. 130 ships and 19,000 men would go to Flanders to pick up an additional 30,000 men and proceed to invade England, all led by the best admiral in all of the world. This admiral had never tasted defeat and had a whopping 44 years of naval service under his belt. Alvaro de Bazan, 1st Marquis of Santa Cruz, but then his free trial of life was expiring, so they decided to replace him with Don Alois Perez de Guzman el Bueno, 7th Duke of Medina Sidonia, whom had little to no combat experience, but was really good at farming simulators.
Senor, I got all the paperwork together and managed to finish the ships in a timely manner, and even hired all the marineros to man them all.
Muy bien.
Senor, I have a couple of questions for you. What does this do? And senor, what exactly is that? Senor, I don't think I'm exactly well suited for this.
Don't sweat it, mi amigo. We will have God on our side.
On 21st of July, 1588, the Spanish Armada set sail to the Netherlands. Everything was going smoothly. They docked and began to transport the 30,000 men, but the 8 English ships arrived to fight the Armada. The Armada panicked in typical Spanish fashion and fled, but the strong currents of the wind and waves crashed and sank most of the Armada. Only 68 ships made it out of the harbor of Calais and traveled back to Spain with a shattering loss, 10 million ducats down the drain.
Philip truly believed he had lost God's favor, due to him having given the order to kill a possibly innocent man and trying to cover it up. So he ordered the trial of Antonio Perez, in which he spilt the beans and was sentenced to death. Meanwhile in France, King Henry III was assassinated due to everybody hating him, and he was replaced with someone much more competent, Henry IV, which was no good for Philip. So he started building up an army to invade at once in the name of Catholicism. I mean, if you're in the middle of losing a war, you might as well start another.
And as you can assume, a lot of people were a bit upset with these chain of events. So Castile, Sicily, and Aragon decided to revolt, but Philip's army was already in the neighborhood, so he easily ate them up. Spain tried several more attempts to invade England, all of which failed miserably, and England tried to do the exact same thing and also failed miserably. At this point, both Philip and Elizabeth are super old, and war essentially ends when they both kick the bucket.
Philip accomplished many things in his life. For example, he put a huge emphasis on religion. He is the reason most of the world is Catholic to this day. He continued colonizing the New World and the Philippines, even yoinking the colonies in Florida from France. Due to him having to administer so much land, he had tons of paperwork, sometimes working from early in the morning to 1 at night.
Philip also had access to the Spanish Road, which was his personal information network, which stretched from Spain all the way to the Low Countries. He would receive information within several days, sometimes even learning about stuff sooner than foreign diplomats, which together with his father's teachings is probably why he was so insistent on micromanaging everything. As the papal nuncio in Spain complained in 1587, His Majesty wants to see and do every single thing himself.
Yes, he would receive information faster than most monarchs at his time, but the situations were constantly changing, so anything he would learn would have already been outdated. Philip at the time of the English War was 59 years old. His daddy Charles died at 58. Philip is super old now. He was often sick with fevers and stomach aches, arthritis, etc. And a lot of his advisors were growing old and dying as well, which leads to the problem of replacing them, which meant he had lackluster advisors.
His constant micromanaging caused problems. When the enterprise of England was to go to the Netherlands to pick up the Spanish troops, the troops themselves were extremely confused. They knew they were going to be transported, but they didn't know how or when, which led to huge delays in the plan for the invasion. And finally, the Spanish ships themselves were poorly made, poorly supplied, and poorly trained, which resulted directly in the failure of the Spanish Armada.
Philip's inflexible faith is the main reason he was not able to accomplish many of his goals, along with the fact that he might have had an obsessive-compulsive personality, which would explain some of his decisions. Between Philip's inflexible faith and his obsessiveness and the fact that he had to rule over 50 million subjects in a monarchy in constant war, it's amazing what he was able to do. As Geoffrey Parker, the author of Imprudent King, A New Life of Philip II, puts it, no one could excel as both clerk of works for the Escorial and as a world statesman. The very skill set that equipped Philip so superbly for the first task, allowing him to produce the eighth wonder of the world, fatally compromised his ability to succeed at the second, as the ruler of the first empire in history on which the sun never set. This is, oh my gosh, this is so retarded. We're so stupid.
No, Escorial me. I hate Spanish.
More Spanish. Like that, but more Spanish.
What?
Like, yeah, like that, but more Spanish.
I don't know.
More Spanish. More Spanish.
Stop saying you do make it more Spanish. You can't make sound Spanish.
Thank you.
Fine, just say
Thank you.
Just do the
You cannot do an expression like that in Spanish. Me gusta burning Protestants, y tú también. Te gustas burning Protestants. We have so much in common.
You can do it a little faster and get off my keyboard.